I'm not going to talk politics. I talk politics every day, and this is a crazy political year. I don't need to tell anyone that. I'm going to talk about life and career. You know, I'm dating myself, but there was an ad slogan that I grew up with, and those of you who recognize it are my age, so be careful. Don't nod. It's, "You've come a long way, baby." Uh-oh. We've got a bunch of old fogies in here. "You've come a long way, baby." It was a cigarette company that is no longer in existence, and they had developed a long, slender cigarette that made women look particularly feminine when they were smoking. And so this ad campaign was amazingly successful at not only sort of making a feminine statement, but also in getting more women to smoke. Well, all I can say is we have come a long way since then. We'd never see anything like that in print or on television for a lot of good reasons. And I do think that we have come a long way, but you know, quite frankly, and we all know this in our hearts, we all have to make our own way. And we have to make our own way generation after generation after generation. So I started my career as a TV anchor, and I spent 25 years in a very tough business. And I moved from that to the world of philanthropy, which is a very sweet business, you would think, but it's not easy giving money away. It's a very responsible position, because what I discovered right away is when you're in the grant-making business, you're not giving money to programs or projects or even institutions. You're giving money to people. And if you don't know that person who's going to be spending that money on behalf of an institution as august as the University of Washington, for example, you can make some big mistakes. So really, everything is a people business. And then I moved to politics a few years ago, and quite frankly, philanthropy, you know, giving away other people's money, what a perfect precursor to politics, where isn't that what it's all about? Politicians get in office so they can give our money away. Isn't that what it is? Well, actually, my first job was not in television news. I got a degree from the University of Washington in journalism, and do you know it was because of my own safety I never took a broadcasting course. The broadcasting courses were only available at night. And walking across that huge campus, every time I went to sign up for a class and I saw that it started at 7 and I knew I'd be walking home in the dark, over a mile by myself, I'd say, next quarter. I'll take that class next quarter when they've moved it to a different time slot. But they never moved it to a different time slot. So I got a degree that was really based in newspaper and writing, and not in television at all, even though in my heart I had a sense that I was going to end up in television news. But I was getting married to a graduate from the Naval Academy, Annapolis, Maryland. He wasn't graduated yet, and so I moved up to his area, and I needed a job, and I had a college degree. So like so many college degree graduates, I landed a job as a secretary receptionist. And that was after getting turned down from an awful lot of jobs. And so by the time I actually got that job, I was so happy. But you know, it was kind of a depressing position because I was a secretary receptionist for a business that was going out of business. It was called the Wildlife Preserve, and it was one of these places you got in Jeeps and drove around and saw wild animals, right there in Maryland. And so all of us were there to shut the place down. Well, I was not very important, but the zookeeper type guy was. And his office was right next to mine. And every day he would call me into his office to tell me a dirty joke. And he was wearing one of those safari jackets. You can picture the look. And he would tell this dirty joke, and I'm standing there in front of him, and then he would burst out laughing, and I stood there awkwardly because it wasn't funny to me. And I thought, well, this is really depressing. I've got to work with this guy next to me. And the next day he did the same thing and the same thing. Well, you know, quite frankly, we didn't have a word for it back then, but it was classic sexual harassment. He brought in a young woman and told her a filthy joke, always related to sex, and then put me in the awkward position with his position of power to have to respond. And of course, you know how socially awkward it is not to laugh when someone tells a joke. So I knew I had to do something, and I went to my boss, the administrator, and I told her about it, and she went to her boss. There were only 5 of us in the office, but the top guy, fortunately, called me into the office and wanted an explanation, and I told him, and he did something about it. And he talked to the zookeeper fellow, and he never harassed me again. Well, you know, this is a very small little anecdote about some of the things you deal with in the workplace, but I remember it so vividly, partly because it was such an embarrassing thing for this young 22-year-old to have to deal with, but partly because as we look back on our careers, there are always situations we find ourselves in with people that we've got to make some decisions, and I decided I was not going to tolerate it, and I needed to do something about it. Fast forward many years later, and I actually filed suit against a gigantic broadcasting company because what they did to me was not right, and it was totally because I was a nice woman employee, and they didn't believe that I would fight them. And so it begins, and all of you, I see a lot of beautiful young faces in the room, and all of you understand that there are times you have to push back and times you have to fight. I married my high school sweetheart, graduate of the Naval Academy, and he joined the Marines. And we became a military couple and were transferred to Hawaii. And that's where I needed to get another job. But let me take you back to that depressing position I had in the wildlife preserve as it was shutting down. A few days into that job, my boss, the administrator, said to me, "Oh, by the way, you know who owns us?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Oh, yeah, you'll get your paycheck from them, American Broadcasting Company." It turned out that ABC, you know ABC, Como 4 is ABC, ABC had this subsidiary of scenic and wildlife attractions. And so here I am, fresh out of journalism school with a yearning to work in broadcasting in this crummy little job, and I discover my paycheck is coming from ABC. So when we moved to Hawaii, the first thing I did was I went to the ABC affiliate in Honolulu, and I wore my little ABC pin, and of course it was on my resume that I worked for ABC. And do you know, that brave soul hired me, and not in television news, with 0 broadcasting experience, but even worse, television sports. I was a sportscaster. And I will tell you, I'm just going to let you in on it. My first interview, my first day on the job, was this hunk of an athlete standing on the sidelines of the Aloha Bowl, and his name was Bruce Jenner. So you see, life takes interesting twists and turns. Okay, you understand how I can survive the politic business, you know, as crazy as it is this year? Life can be kind of crazy. But I'm just we were given 10 minutes to speak, and I don't want to take anything more than my time, because you've got some fabulous, fabulous panelists. Many of them I know and admire greatly that are going to be coming up all day today, and we need to get back on time. But I just want to share with you one thought. You know, in the broadcast news business, there were some brilliant people who never graduated from college. And I was always rather amazed, but they started college and they decided, you know, this is either boring or I want to do something else. And you know, there are some brilliant entrepreneurs who never graduated from college. One of them is in our city, Bill Gates. And so as much as we talk about the importance of education, and folks, it is hugely important for your careers to be well educated and to pursue the best education you can get. It's not the only thing that makes you successful. And of course, we know that there are all kinds of other things we can do to be successful. One is working hard. You know, the work ethic has been slowly eroding over time. And when someone comes into my office that works hard, boy, is it noticeable. And so working hard is another great characteristic that helps you succeed. But I will tell you the one that I think is the very most important. And without it, I don't think you can be a success. And that is emotional resilience. In other words, life is hard. And many of us have struggled through ups and downs. And haven't we all had that experience where we get physically sick, we have a terrible grief, a death of a loved one, and something terrible happens at work or in our personal lives, and all of a sudden it just feels like the world is crashing down around us. It seems to happen that way. But it's our ability to get out of that that allows us to move on and succeed. My mom was half Norwegian and half German. And I just have to tell you, it's a lethal combination. Her favorite word to us was buck up. In other words, there were never pity parties at home. If I said to her, I'm fed up at age 5, I'm going to run away from home, she would say, let me help you pack your bags. And so I love this quote from C.S. Lewis. It says, it's from the Narnia Tales. Any of you who've read the Narnia Tales or seen any of the movies? Crying is all right in its way while it lasts, but soon you have to stop, and then you still have to decide what to do. And so, in other words, crying is okay while it lasts, but then you've got to stop and figure out what to do. Keela's nodding because I know her story, and I know there were tears in that story, her personal story, and I hope she tells it. Oh, good, she said she is. At some point, we have to stop and figure out what we're going to do. Well, where does this emotional resilience come from? Well, it's part personality, I'm sure. There's something in us that's got enough fight to keep going. But partly it's nurture. You know, I've heard of friends who grew up with a bunch of brothers, and they said, you know, I had to buck up because I had brothers. And then I know girls who grow up with only sisters. Well, you know, I grew up with only sisters. I had to buck up. It's sort of like every family nurtures us into successful human beings or not. But you know, character also plays a major part. And our character is always evolving. And my hope for all of you as you move forward, and I know, I look in this room and I see some very brave people. And what I want to encourage you is to look at your life as a developing character with every experience, the ups and the downs, giving you that perspective and that personal growth that allows you to have emotional resilience. The day my boss called me into his office in 2002 and said, we've hired your replacement, it was such a shock to me because that's not the way you get rid of people in television news. You usually very quietly say, you know, we're not going to renew your contract and we're just going to give you some time to find a new job. But that was not the game that was being played in my scenario. And as I sat there trying to sort it all out, try to figure out what it meant, I kept thinking about little Rebecca Notkin, who was going to have her spine opened up the next day at Children's Hospital. And as I sat there, and I wanted to burst into tears, I wanted, you know, to scream and shout, all I could do was think of Rebecca Notkin having to have her spine opened up at age 8 at Children's Hospital. All around us, we have people who are reminding us to keep our perspective. And in that perspective, and Keela is one of them who's going to help you all keep your perspective when you hear her story today. In that perspective, we can keep going. We can be tough and we can bounce back. We can buck up. We can get through the ups and downs of our jobs and everything that is thrown in our direction. Emotional resilience is the key to our success. Thank you.